Imagine building a self-editing application. What that means is that you could talk to it and it generates all the data in the back end, or you could ask it to visualize it and HTML pages suddenly materialized. In this video, we're going to use the Agent SDK from Claude Code to do that, and we're going to build this application using the BMAD method. I'm Happy Dave. Let's get into it. Now, this video is a step-by-step tutorial, so if you want to move ahead or go backwards and forwards, check out the chapter links in the description. Now, what we're building today is this self-editing application. We're going to use the Claude Agent SDK and the BMAD method. Now, if this all works, what we'll be demonstrating is the idea of creating a bunch of products, building out a product listing, maybe even a details page for it, adding a home page, making some of those products featured, and then adding more products along the way. Now, the magic of a self-editing application is firstly this human experience. So we'll be able to talk to the computer, have it generate features, have it generate data, and we'll be doing that using vibe coding sort of techniques. But the technical reality of this is that we're going to use context engineering using the BMAD method and tools like the Agent SDK to make this application a reality. So our Agent SDK application is built, and this is what it can do for us. So we're going into the chatbot where we're going to enter in some products. We should be able to view those products and see that they've been stored in the back end. At any time, we should be able to create a HTML page. Notice that there's a live activity. There's also live pages. If we click on the pages, we should be able to go and see the products listing. At any time, then we should be able to add a new product or update it, and it should come through instantaneously. If we need a home page, we should be able to add a link and create a home page at the same time. When we go to that home page, we should be able to navigate back to the products. And at the end of the video, there's a complex multi-page workflow demonstration. Now, let's just talk a little bit about the planning ahead of time. So I've already got a planning folder in place for what we're going to do. I've got some preliminary tech stack stuff, but I want to run all of this through the BMAD method. Now, which version of the BMAD method should we use? Should we use version 4, which is the current, or should we use the version 6 Alpha 9? Now, I tried a video yesterday on Alpha 8, and I don't particularly believe it's ready for use just yet for this sort of project. So we're going to work with version 4, and that means what we're going to do is use this command here, npx BMAD method install. If you do want to use the version 6, it's all available. Now, the problems I ran into with version 6, I've already communicated with Brian from BMAD, and he's aware of it, and he's talking through the changes that are coming in place related to those issues. But for today, we'll keep it simple and work with version 4. Now, in the repo that we're building all this, which is 07 BMAD Claude SDK, you can go to the bottom and find the links. So here's the link to the version 4 BMAD. And if you scroll down a little bit, we'll go and select our starting command. With that selected, we can go over to our terminal. And I've already got some pages here. The README that you were just seeing is in here at that location. And I've got a planning phase in my documents directory already. So we've cleared the screen and putting in the npx BMAD method install, and that's going to walk us through a wizard. So let's work through step by step. And the first thing is the folder. Now it's opened it up to an npx directory. So what I'm going to do is put in the directory where we're building this application today. After that, it's talking about different frameworks of BMAD that we can install. This all changes a fair bit in version 6. We've got better games set up in that particular version. For now, we'll just go with the Agile core. In version 4, when it comes to the PRD, product requirements document, and the architecture document, you can shard the files, meaning that they can be split up into individual files after generation. This changes a little bit in version 6, but for today, we'll say yes. And then you can decide on what agent coding system you're going to use. I'm using Claude Code, so we'll just select that. And in this example, we're not going to use Gemini or Codex, so I'm going to say no to those models. Now, it started off with this idea of reading the user guide. So we'll take a copy of that and head over to Visual Studio. Now, let's have a look at what I already had in place. So I already have a docs folder with just this planning directory. So there's a fair bit of spikes and examples of how this application could work. we'll draw on that when we're building our product brief. We've got a Claude file in place. We've got our Claude subfolder, and you'll notice that there's an area called commands. So all the BMAD methods have been set up within this area. And then the rest of BMAD is in the BMAD core, where we've got different workflows, teams, templates for working through checklists. We've got our agents, and we've got this little user guide that it told us to read. So let's pop that up. We've got a user guide for the Greenfield project. So this is a brand new project. Brownfield is for if you've already got an existing code base. And we can start with a project idea. We've got an optional analyst research. Now we don't need that because I've already done all the planning, but we might just work through it temporarily to see what it does. Then we've got to build the brief. So with the brief, we're doing the product requirements document. We'll do a bit of UX design. We'll do a little bit of architecture design, and then at the end, we'll make it all cohesive. And with the cohesion in place, that's when we'll start using a Scrum Master to design stories and a developer to actually create the code for those stories. So let's start with our terminal, and we're going to use Claude Code, and I'm going to run it with the dangerously skip permissions. Now it's fresh context, and we've just added a lot of context from Claude. So I'm just going to run an init on this. I'm going to give it a little bit of extra information. We've got this planning folder, but I don't want it to take too much over with the Claude file. I want it to be referenced. I wanted to maybe use it as a guideline for what the project will be about. But the main focus of Claude should be on the BMAD method and whatever it decides to create. So with those two statements, what we can see is that we're improving the Claude MD to prioritize the BMAD workflows. So what is Claude MD? That's essentially the system prompt. So it's available every time we do a prompt that anything in this file will be used. And we want it to be hyper-focused on what it does. So anything in red has been removed. And that's a lot of the stuff that I did in pre-planning before this video. We can see that my folder hierarchy that does exist has been removed from the system prompt. But the important stuff, that it's a self-editing application, is in place, that the core of the server should only be about 200 lines of code. It's got a very clean understanding of what the BMAD workflow is. So we've got the workflow primary path. We've got step 1, which is installation. Now we've already done that. We've got step 2, which will be the analyst agent doing a workflow init, and it just keeps going doing this hyper-focused system prompt. So we'll start off by having a fresh version of Claude, and we'll put in a / command, and the one we're going to go with is Analyst, and Analyst will load up Mary. Now there's a lot of things that Mary can do. For this session, mostly we're going to focus on creating a project brief, but she's one of these agents that you can spend a long time in just doing all sorts of planning and research. So we just go back to Claude Code and we'll have create a project brief by reading an existing document. And if we put in the @ sign, we can start putting in project reference, and we'll select it and we'll see what she can do with that particular document. So the create project brief is going to read from our project reference. And what it does is it uses commands like the create doc, which is based on a template already in the BMAD core. And for this, we're going to work in the interactive mode. So we'll just press 1. YOLO would be the fast way to do it. And with my project documentation, it could just work out perfectly. But I want to be pretty sure with this. So notice that the output file is going to be .sbrief, and we can see that it's working through many to-dos. Currently, it's written the executive summary for it. And I've read it through. It's all pretty perfect. I think the target market says it all. It's developers learning AI, agent integration, and self-modifying systems. It's for technical educators. That's what I do, where I want to generate systems that are a bit flexible and dynamic pretty quickly. That's also rapid prototyping. That's what we're doing today. And then we've got the BMAD method practitioners. Now, one thing is to know that I'll be testing this with version 6 BMAD. And if there is anything you want me to test it with, let me know in the comments below. But for now, we'll just proceed to the next section. And the good thing is it started writing the brief. So we'll just bring up Visual Studio and click on this file here. And so as it goes, we can keep track of what's going on the left-hand side, but let's have a look at this problem statement that it's come up with. So reading through the problem statement, everything's pretty good. One of the things I notice is the database. This is where this application will be a little different to a lot of applications. It won't have a database. Instead, it's just going to have JSON documents, JSON. They're going to be stored in the server, and for saving them, it's just going to be committed to a repository. Now, this is not a normal application that you would run in the cloud, I guess, but for me, it allows me to rapidly create tools that I use locally on my computer through a web interface. So I think we can just move on to the next section, and what it will start doing is writing an updated brief. We should see it pop in below. It's updating, so we can see a whole new green section, and here it is listed in the Markdown document. Now, if there was anything out of whack with it, rather than using Claude to change it, you might just manually come in and alter the document here to have it to rectify any flaws that you notice. It's important also that you do rectify flaws because these propagate through. If you fix it now, you have less issues in the future. So the next area we're going to work on is the proposed solution section. So it's written the proposed solution. If we go over and have a look, we can see that it's going to use an Express JavaScript server. Embedded into it will be a Claude Agent SDK backend. Some of the tools that we'll have is the ability to read and write JSON files and also to write HTML files. The main front-end technology is that we'll use React with Socet Io so that we can stream information live. And we're going to use BMAD method version 4. There's also a little note here about using Shadcn for the user interface. We might also use the Vercel AI elements. Now, the backend is meant to be simple, just about 200 lines of code. And one of the key requirements is that I can just use it with my Max account from Claude. I don't need to go and pay any API costs with this particular tool. Now, while that's been happening in the background, it's been setting up the target users. We'll get it to start writing that brief for us. Once it's done the target users section, it should move on automatically to the goals and success metrics. All I've had to do each time is basically say the next number for it to save the file. So the target users have been updated. It should go directly into the next area. But if we have a look at the target users, we can see that it's a learning system for developers. But I would argue that it's for anyone that wants to learn context engineering, which is partly about building applications, but it's about building any system in a business or in your personal workflows. This is also an area that you could pull out because I think anyone should be able to learn this. One of the things about what we're doing is that we're not writing any code ourselves. Everything is just understanding a little bit of architecture, following a plan, and using natural language processes the entire way. So now it's about to create the goals and success metrics. We've already written all the target user information. It reads the brief each time, does what it needs to do, and then writes the brief again. And you might be wondering, well, what does it need to do? How does it know to do that? And this is just one of the internal mechanisms of the BMAD method. So now the KPIs or the key performance indicators have been updated. We can go look at it while we move on to the next section. One of the things I would suggest is, in this case, they're not that useful for me. I don't really care about these numbers here. 1,000 developers clone or fork the repository, not important to me. Content amplification, if people use it, I'd be really happy about that. I guess if anything was important is that people are using a sound content engineering system, which is BMAD method. But quite frankly, this section is a bit of fluff today for us. But the next area is really important, and this is the minimum viable product. And so as a must-have, it's working on the idea of it having 3 epics. Now, this is not normal, by the way. This is not the normal area to put in epics. Usually we do that after we've done the architecture and the PRD, and it comes later. But I put this specifically into my planning documents because I'm thinking of this as a simple application with 3 different areas that we need to do. We need a foundation. That's the server, the client. It just needs to be set up. After that, the back end is the main area that we want to work on. For the Claude Agent SDK implementation, I've already done what's called a core loop or the event loop documentation. And essentially, this is just a human readable list. it should work no matter what target language this system is built for. Now, we are going for JavaScript, and so hopefully that'll translate pretty readily. And then the third area is that we're going to have a beautiful user interface. So this is basically using the Vercel and Shadcn and Tailwindcss and just getting it to talk to the back end with streams. And as that information hits the SDK, perform any data creation or web page designs as we go. And the next section of the MVP is what not to do. So we don't need a database. We don't need multi-tenancy, multi-user. We don't need authentication or authorization. We don't need model context protocol. Good thing about using BMAD is that I've used it for enterprise applications really effectively. So it can do all of these, but we're keeping it out of the example. So after that, we're going to build the post MVP or the post minimum viable product vision. And we can see that it's already come up with most of that. It's got different tools that we might want to add later on and additional areas like multi-agent workflows, production release. Now, quite frankly, I could maybe delete all of this and be happy because I'm not planning to go further with this particular project. It's going to be the foundation for other tools that you'll see me creating using the BMAD method. So it's gone off and now thought about the technical considerations. They've all been set up. It feels that we need to use React version 19. And if we look at it in the markdown, it's TypeScript and Vite, Shadcn, Tailwindcss. This is all for the front end. If we look a bit further, we've got the back end, which is an Express server. We've got an installation of the agent SDK planned. We're going to communicate between the two systems with Socet Io, and we're running it on Node. For our database, it's just going to be some JSON documents in the data directory. Future, we could use a database if we like. And the hosting is it's just planned to run on localhost. So with that, we can go and look at the next section. It's currently working on the constraints and assumptions. So this was a big thing for me. Is it going to cost me anything? No, I want it to hook into my Max account, and that should be how it works. Developer time, 40 to 60 hours for the MVP. Let's go and look at the risk and open question. And this is really useful. I've never done the agent SDK, so it is a dependency with high risk for me when I'm doing this video. The constraint, I think that the statement here could be true, but I don't think it matters. It's not that I have to do it in 200 lines of code. It's just that I don't want it to be complex. That's kind of why I'm doing the constraint. I will talk about this section briefly. I took out a section called the BMAD quality gates. What I wanted to have happen is that rather than pure vibe coding where the user says, I would like a new homepage, I wanted it to actually create a BMAD story on the back end. Now, I think for this demonstration, it's maybe a reach goal, maybe we'll do it, but this would be a really powerful idea that users could just sit on the front end and say, I want a new capability. And BMAD at the other end hears that and says, well, let me create a story for you. And then the developer can go off and create it. But for today, I've taken it out. So that's the docs brief finish. You notice it's now saying to go on to the next agent. It's got everything written. What we're going to do is exit out, because what I'd like to do is have a clean context the next time we start. But while we're looking at that, let's just see what that last section was. So we've got the next step, immediate action is we're going to create the product requirements document. We're going to do that by loading the project manager agent and running the create PRD command. Let's also look at what we've got in our system. So everything that you see on the left in planning is stuff I've done ahead of time. So the only one document we have in the system specifically created by BMAD is the brief. Now, I'll just take a moment out to suggest that if you want a little bit more hand-holding or just seeing day-to-day operations on using the BMAD method, context engineering to produce applications or other sorts of business systems, then you might want to check the link in the description where you can go to my Skool Community, where I'll be talking about this on a day-by-day basis. But next, let's go and look at creating this PRD. Now, to do that, we're going to have a new agent, and the agent we want is the project manager. So we load the project manager in with the /PM command, and John comes into existence with a whole lot of capabilities. Now, the one we want is the create PRD. So we just paste that in, and let's see what comes up. And you notice that the way BMAD works is it works with context documents. So we've got the create doc.md. There was also a template going on, which we can see here, and a bit of configuration YAML. Now in version 6, a lot of this stuff still happens similarly, but they've made it a lot more flexible. Now you may notice when you start with a clean Claude code is that the context is empty, and so certain things it doesn't know about. So this idea of do you have a project brief, which we just worked on, is something it doesn't currently know about. So I'm just going to put in 1. That's what we want to do. And I'll put in the @ sign and start typing brief. And we'll just press enter. So it'll use that as loaded context. So it's read in the brief. I've read it. Everything seems okay to me. So I'm just going to press 1 and continue on that. Notice as it goes, it creates a change log. So we've got version 1, which is the initial PRD created from the project brief. And now we get into the hearts of what a product requirements document is. We're coming up with the functional requirements as we go. So FR1 would be the first functional requirement. So it's listing all the basic capabilities that this application is going to do. And then after that, it does the non-functional requirements, which is all abstractions or ideas that the system's going to work on, such as the line limit on the server, the fact that we're going to use Claude Auth to log into the system. Now, like with the interactive mode with product brief, we could just move on to the next section, but it's got a couple of areas needing validation. Is 200 lines realistic, and should we have pre-built examples? So I'm just going to make a simple adjustment here. It says the 200 is a suggestion. What I'm trying to do is have the actual event loop of the agent be fairly small and contained. There's not a lot that you need to do there, but this is a guideline. It's not a limit at all. What I wanted to ensure that it does is not create complex structures as it builds out this system, because there's nothing complex about the Claude Code event loop. The other thing I wanted to talk about is this area of should we have a pre-built example application? No, we shouldn't. This is all vibe coding that we're going to ask people to do, but we may actually create some examples later on. So we'll just press enter on that. And so the functional requirements have been updated. We've removed a concept and we've done slight updates. And so this is a lot more important than in the brief to get this right. So we'll move on to the next step. But the idea is that this is what's actually going to get built. Now, the user interface design guides have come through. I've read through all of this, and most of it was good, except there was one area, and probably the core area, which is these screens. And this is not working the way I'm thinking. So the first thing it says is chat interface, primary screen, full height chat with message history, input field, streaming indicator, and example starters. Love that. That is the only thing that I saw this initial application having. It's then got concept of a status panel, shows active story, recent file operations, quality gate status. Now that's more complexity than I need. My thoughts were that as soon as you started typing stuff in here, you could generate HTML in the back end. And now that doesn't necessarily mean the menus would work, but the actual pages should work. I had a plan for this particular application that BMAD stories would get generated. That's what the quality gates were. But then I've taken it out, made it a future thing. So if we go to the very bottom, I said this section here doesn't make sense anymore. And then I've said the next 2 steps, which are these ones down here, which I've copied from above, are too complex. And I've given it a little bit more clarity on what to do. So we'll just run with that. Again, it's so important in this area that you actually get it stating exactly what you think you want to see. So it's come through. Red is what it's changing. Green is what it's changing it to. You can see it's continuing with simplified user interface, but we can also go over to Visual Studio and have a look at the document like before. Here in a simple markdown viewer, so BMAD Claude self-editing application, we've got our functional requirements kicking into place here. And we can see some of the modifications like the /chat and the /products as examples. So we go back to our conversation and this makes a whole lot more sense. We've got the application presents as a minimal chat interface. We know it can generate concepts like products and blogs, even though there may not be a navigation menu in place. The one little bit of styling we'll have is that it can do dark mode and light mode. And so we can move on to the next step. There is one big issue in here, and this is the issue of anyone using vibe coding, is that this application, when we build it, will allow us to change our backend server. Now, that's both a security issue. You wouldn't do this on a public website. This is an internal tool, but it means how do we manage those changes? And I'm assuming in my setup that I'm going to use git commit, so I should be able to roll back. But that's not necessarily the most technically easy thing for people to use. But for this example, that's how I'm planning to do it. Now, here what it's done is come up with the technical assumptions. They're all based off the project brief, which is great. I've read through all of them and they're all very accurate. This is exactly the way I see it happening. But I thought I'd point out one area. So where did this all come from? It came from something called the Storyline app. Now, I think it's important that we look at the Storyline application because the catalyst for building this project was, could we generate stories dynamically on the fly? So if we head over to a web view, and we're looking at what is a client and server sort of system. So currently we are connected to the server and it's using the same technology we're about to build. And if we go and have a look at our project files, we've got something called The Boy and the Baker. Now, The Boy and the Baker is a 5-minute video that we've created. And when you look at it, you can see that it's a story. And the story starts off with an elderly baker walks into his shop to see a boy being beaten and bullied by some younger children. So we can see pictures of this baker along the way. Now, if we go and toggle the image display, we can see that we got an establishing shot. We've also got other versions of the shot available. So as we move through this story, and it goes for 5 minutes, all of these images are character consistent, they're theme and style consistent. And so we build our movie by using the image prompts with tools like DALL-E 3 and Sora, and we use the animation prompts along the way for doing the animations in Halo or VO3. The interesting thing is that everything that you're seeing is based off this one narrative. So we've got a little narrative. It creates setting, the ambience, the characters, the description. We got the image prompt and we got the animation prompt. And I've been going through and refactoring this so that this is a lot more deeper. But really, I just want to type this into a text box and have all of this extra information generated for me automatically. And that's what this application is meant to do. We should just be able to say something into a text box and have complex data structures form around that information. So let me give you a glimpse of what the application we're currently building can be used for. And it's this Storyline application that generated this movie. We've got character consistency, scene consistency, and everything was generated using Claude code in the background to generate the data structures. So as we start asking questions like, can you create 3 products? That will generate complex JSON documents behind the scene. Well, that's what's happened with the Storyline application. But instead, there's a simple narrative that converts into image and style guides. Now, if you're interested in seeing the 5-minute video around The Boy and the Baker by Voz, then check out the link in the description below. But for now, let's get back to John, our product manager. So I just press 1 to move forward and we've got our epic list and it looks like there's going to be 3 epics, which is what I'd suggested it to do anyway. So we've got the Monorepo set up with basic client and server, NPM workspaces, we've got an Express server, minimal HTML client. So that looks good. After that, we're really working on the back end, which is the agent SDK integration. It's going to have the 3 tools that I talked about. And then we're going to polish up the communication with the front-end chat interface here. So then we've got our sequencing logic. I think the good bit is the story count. It's listing 3 to 4 stories per epic. There isn't a lot of work in each section. And then it's listed its rationale and decisions. I read through that. This all seems to make sense for me. So at this point, we've got many stories already set up for different epics. The first one is Monorepo set up with a client and server. So the basic application structure for the front end talking to the back end. Next, we have epic number 2, which is essentially setting up the Claude agent SDK so that it can communicate from server through to the client. And when you look at the goal, there's also tools included, such as talking to JSON and HTML files. And the final epic, epic number 3, is all about building a React front end and using libraries like Shadcn and Tailwindcss. Now, if we go back to the top of the epic, we'll see that every story follows a common formula that's designed for agile development. So firstly, we've got a story number. So in this case, it's 1.1. Then we've got a simple title for what the story is going to be about. This is initializing the workspace in the Monorepo. So the idea of a user story is this 3-part formula that says, as a particular person using the capability, what do they want to achieve? That's the I want. And if they did achieve it, what would they get? Then there's an acceptance criteria. So this story is considered complete when all of these items are checked off. And this concept's going to repeat through every story in the epic. So what I'll do now is I'll read through every story headline, and then we'll see pretty quickly that there may be some flaws in the way that it's come up with. So the first thing it wants to do in the epic is initialize the npm workspaces and Monorepo. That sounds really good. Then it's going to create an Express TypeScript server. After that, it's going to get a very basic HTML client up and running. And finally, we're just going to have a little bit of an end-to-end test, and mainly that'll be worked out by starting both servers and checking the browser logs, checking the console logs. So far, epic number 1 looks pretty good. We'll see if it needs any changes when we look at the next epic. So now we're moving on to epic 2, which is all about setting up the Anthropic Claude SDK. And it talks about, let's get it installed. Seems like a good first step. After that, it's trying to implement one of the tools, which is the read JSON. Then it's going to do the write JSON and the write file. And then after all of that, we're going to integrate socket streaming, and we're going to do it both for the server, but we're also going to have the chat messages working with this. And then after that, we're going to implement the full event loop. Now, it's this particular epic that I'm having a few challenges with, and I'll go over what they are soon and how I can change them pretty quickly. But let's look at the third epic. Now, the third epic is all about setting up a React application as the front end. So when we look at 3.1, it's initializing React with Vite application. Then 3.2 is setting up Shadcn, configuring it with Tailwindcss. After that, we build the chat interface using the Vercel AI elements. And lastly, we're just giving it a simple light mode, dark mode. Now we've got all sorts of rationale being listed. We could move on from there. But like I said, I think there's a problem in Epic 2. And the main issues I can see is that after installing the SDK, it starts going into setting up tools, but we haven't defined yet where they fit into the event loop. We don't even know whether the event loop is going to work and communicate correctly with the client. And so as we work through all the stories in Epic 2, we're going to be pretty blind to whether they're working until the very end of the epic, where it all comes together in a big avalanche. So to resolve this problem, I could have a conversation here, but what I find easier is to just start selecting the context we need. And what I've done is copied all the way up to when the epic first started. At this point, I just select that, put it in the clipboard. After that, I just like to open a new conversation, which I've got down below, and I've started it with the statement, I want to read and absorb the following information and then wait for me for guidance. And that complete epic list has been pasted in. So that new conversation knows what we've got. I've got it highlighted in blue, and I just tell it that you're going to help me build up an instruction that we can put back into the previous conversation. So the goal of this conversation is purely to build a prompt to paste into this conversation. But before we get started, I ask it to do a bit of a Q&A session with me to get clarity around the problems as I see it. I tell it that I'm pretty happy with Epic 1. I think it's good, but I think there's stuff that we're going to talk about in Epic 2 that will impact it. So I just prepare it to know that it can change Epic 1, even though at the moment it's pretty good. After that, I went through Epic 2 and each of the stories, and I just gave it this long diatribe. Now, I was just dictating directly into the microphone. It was writing out everything as we go. And so the good thing about this is it can make it more readable for me. So the first thing it does is start to unpack the issues that I had addressed. Figured out that stories 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4 can't be properly verified until we've done the event loop. It also worked out that the event loop is not a single story. There's both a beginning and an incremental development of it before it finishes. It identified from my conversation that what was called Story 2.4 was actually two different concepts. One was the streaming client area. The other was the same streaming client, but specifically for the agent SDK. And this also led it to understanding that 1.4 might need some modifications. Now, because I asked it to do a Q&A system, it actually came up with 4 pretty solid questions. But one of the things I noticed while reading them was it kind of suggested the answers as it went. So it's a question of, is it asking me questions or does it already have good recommendations and I just need to sign them off? So I just told it that the questions it's asking, I already thought it had the answer. Could you just give me the recommendation? It just saves me a lot more time than actually engaging in the Q&A. And so it wrote these recommendations. So the minimum viable event loop after 2.1 becomes this idea of create a basic event loop, and there's no tooling, no streaming. There's just the fact that it can receive messages from the SDK. At the moment, at the end of Epic 1, we're just doing HTTP requests, but it thinks that it might be useful to put in some socket functionality at that point. It now feels that the event loop that we're building is a bunch of capabilities that can be done as multiple stories. And we can move the tools that we want to do into 2.4 to 2.6. And when I look at that, I realize that even before we move on to Epic 3, if I want to build in other capabilities like Claude skills, this Epic will be the right way to go because it's designed in such a way that each cross-cutting concern or aspect can be added one at a time later on if needed. So it's already figured out a much better plan. But remember that the initial part of this conversation was, can you create the instruction for me? So I just tell it down the bottom here and I'll press enter that this is perfect. I love the way it's thinking. What it needs to do is now create those instructions that we want to put back into the top conversation. And just so you know, that top conversation is this one that's here. We're going to take whatever's comes out of this conversation and drop it straight into here to modify it. So here's our detailed instruction set. We can just go all the way to the bottom with this. We'll make a copy of it, come up here and paste it in. 203 lines of information just by asking a couple of questions. So it's already started working on things. One of the interesting things is it's also playing around with the product requirements document right here. So the changes we asked for have been implemented. We've got a change to story 1.4 and we've got a whole new reordering and breaking up of Epic 2. And what the number of stories really tell us is how many development sessions are going to go on, because we'll get the Scrum Master and the developer to work on each of the stories sequentially, starting from 1 and going through to number 14. So quickly looking at the PRD, we've got the new Epic list. It's the Monorepo set up, the agents or the server in the back end and the front end client. And then we've got all the details coming through one story at a time. These are just simple stories. They'll be converted into full-blown stories with the Scrum Master and then add streaming and logging as we go. And then after that, we can do the tools and then finally connect it all up to the React front end. So with the very complete Epic list in place, we'll come back to our conversation and just move on to the next step, which is the checklists. So what the checklist has done is just read the PRD. Now, this is from a product owner or a product manager's point of view. So this is all the business cases have been covered. We haven't yet gone to the tech stack or the software architect's point of view. That's the next area. But when we look at it, it says it's 92% complete. There's problems with it, but it's mentioned that the user research area isn't really that relevant for a demonstration like this, so I won't worry about it. And so everything else has passed except for this area in the MVP. So any blockers to moving forward? Well, there's none identified. Are there any high-level issues that we should be aware of? I think this is one we might address, but we'll do it asking a recommendation rather than actually taking the time to define it, because the AI will probably do a better job than me at coming up with an answer anyway. These medium level issues don't really matter to me. Like the target user doesn't matter and the success metrics don't matter in this particular project. Now, my background has been software engineering, software architecture, and even for a time a Scrum Master. So these numbers that you're seeing here, the 23 days to get this application written, are legitimate numbers. This is about how long it would take to do a project like this if you were doing it in an enterprise system. But at the end of the video, I'll tell you how long it's taken to do the documentation and to do the coding. So we'll see what numbers really come back. So I've just dictated a little statement about the outer scope area, like what does it suggest we put in there. And I've also said that for the logging, I don't want to use a logging framework, but I wouldn't mind some simplistic patterns predefined before we get started. And this is perfect. This is just what I didn't want to actually type in myself. So we're not going to use database and persistent. Authentication authorization isn't needed. It's not for production. Testing infrastructure is not important in this process. Advanced features like quality gate hooks, all this sort of stuff was all out of scope for me. It doesn't need to be a polished UI, though I hope it'll be pretty good with Shadcn and Tailwindcss. Logging and monitoring is also really good. It's come up with just a simple JavaScript logger platform. It's not trying to use libraries or anything like that. So I'm just asking it to update the PRD with all the changes. The only little change I mentioned is that the hot module reloading, which is a developer experience, changes like modifying a bit of code and seeing it updated directly in the client is a really nice capability to have in the application. So we're all complete with our PRD. At this point, it's suggesting that we hand off to the architect. We could do it in this conversation, but what we'll do is we'll just exit out of Claude and start a new Claude session because we want to have a clean context to get up and running with the architecture. Now, I just want to point out some basic maintenance that I like to do with working with Claude. So I've just put in this little prompt here. And the reason is that we've created a brief, we've created a PRD, but my initial system prompt or the Claude prompt is pointing to the planning phase of the system. But now that BMAD method has done these great documents, I want to ensure that my Claude file knows about them. And so it's taken some old ideas like the planning documents and the BMAD execution guide, which are now, this one's not relevant anymore. And this one's just lower priority. So it's said we've got the brief, we've got the PRD, and then we've got the planning guide. Now, a lot of changes have been made, but if we go down the bottom and have a look at the summary, we can see that our system prompt has a very clear understanding of everything we've done right now. One of the other things I noticed is that it knows that the next step is going to be the architecture. So if we come down and we will clear out again and start with a new Claude context. We'll go straight into the architecture agent, let it load, and we can move into creating things. So we don't need the back-end architecture and front-end individually. We just need the full stack architecture. So we'll just paste that in and kick it off. So the architect is going to generate our architecture at this location in the docs folder. It's read the project brief, it's read the PRD. We have a basic introduction and it's worked out for starter templates that while it's based on a different idea, there is no starter templates. So for us, it's just going to put in a change log and we can move on to the next section, which is the main architecture. So it's written out a lot of information. I've read through it all. It's pretty much just restating a lot of the stuff we've already got. We've got a technical summary, we've got the platform and infrastructure. One of the things that it notices is that for an MVP, we don't need any complexities like a platform or infrastructure as service approach. We've got some sort of interesting graph that's going to show up in our Markdown document and a list of the architecture patterns and the rationale. At that point, we can just move on to the next section, which is building the tech stack. So it currently hasn't written the Markdown document, so a lot of this is a little unreadable, but we've got the full tech stack table going on. And again, we've got rationale summary, including the key technology choices. We've got the trade-offs of not having concepts like caching and the database. We're going to use version pinning, so I should be recording what version it's on, like React 19. And these ideas could be important if we're using an MCP to go and get documentation around React or Express. It needs to know what version to work with. Now, if you are actually coming from a point of view where you don't fully understand all the terminology going on, remember there are other ways that you can deal with this documentation. So you can use chain of thought, all sorts of Q&A sort of stuff. I understand generally the technology going on, so I'm just pressing 1 to move forward. So now it gets into the data models, and this is just the transport or usage of data in the system. So the first idea of the chat interface and the fact that it might have a ID such as the user or the AI bot, content and status, this is all great. The only thing I'm a little concerned about is, does it match with the Vercel AI chatbot? Got a section on the tool calling, so the reading of the JSON, writing of the JSON, and then just messaging between client and server. So it's only identified 3 different objects that we need: the chat message, tool call, and the socket event. So with that, I'm just going to move forward. So we can now just move on to the API specification. The only thing I was looking at here, which I thought interesting, is that we are using this bidirectional communication pattern. Now, I don't know how much I'm going to be changing specifically on the server that I need to send back to the client, because I know this was based off a different application, the Storyline app that I talked about, where a lot of that would happen, but I think this will work pretty cleanly. So now it's just working out all the different components where it thinks the files are going to be as it builds out the application. One of the interesting things about doing it this way is that when we go back and look at the PRD, we may find out that the order of doing things, which the PRD will list, might be in conflict with some of the architecture decisions. Now, in version 6 of the BMAD method, they deal with that with a section called solutioning. I don't think it existed in version 4, so we'll deal with that ourselves when we get to it. We can also see here that there's a big component diagram being created that we can go and look at a bit later. So it's pretty good. It's come up with the idea that there's a data directory, and that's where it's going to put JSON documents based on the ideas I've already told it about. It's got the concept of products. It's got the concept of blog posts. Maybe it needs some configuration. So if we needed to do a homepage and it had a logo or a theme, that's where that sort of information could go. It's given a sample file structure talking about the idea that files should be in kebab case, and that it's essentially just an array of JSON objects, though we can see with that one that that's more just a general object. Now, there's no schema validation, so this system could be brittle or fragile in the real world, but I think for the use cases we're doing, it'll work pretty well. And if we did want a more strict rules system, we could introduce something like ZOD or some sort of schema to make sure that any data being written or read from always follows a certain format. So we'll just move on to the next area. One of the things we can see here from our trade-offs is that this is not designed for big systems. It's really just a little internal tool that I want to use it for at the moment. So it's come up with a plan for our front-end components. We've got the chat interface. We've got some generic UI controls. We've got the idea of the sockets. It'll just be a single page application, no router involved, and a bunch of static HTML pages. I think the big issue we might have there is keeping style consistency when we generate things, and we haven't catered for that, but we'll see how it goes when we start running the application. So plenty more examples coming through. So we're nearly done with the architecture. We've just put in the system backend. We've got the agents, how they're all going to work. We've got the tools that we need to work with, a couple of utilities, plenty of example code coming through, more diagrams being added to the system. So we can see here it's going to have a native NPM workspace. We're going to have 3 packages. So we've got server, client, and the shared types going on. Now, the full workflow from the command line has been listed with Node, NPM. We've got the Claude auth. This will allow us to hook up our agent SDK to our local Claude account. It plans to have a single line to get it all up and running. Just npm run dev will start both the server and the client. And now we're on to the remaining sections. So we've got the deployment strategy coming through. We've got a continuous integration, continuous development pipeline, but it's very empty. There's nothing really going on just yet. Conversations about environment. We've got security coming through. We've got performance metrics. We've got all the testing approaches just documented as future. They're not in place just yet, but we do have sample code of what it could look like in the future. And then we've got the error handling strategy. We've got a diagram and we've got sample codes to work with. Now we've got a 2,500 line document created. It's quite extensive. If we jump over to VS Code and look at it, we can see it's got concepts like the high level architecture. We've got diagrams being generated. We can see that the plan is for the user to interact with the browser and for that to talk to the agent event loop. The agent event loop should then be doing any tool calling that it needs to do and returning information back to the ChatGPT stream. We've got the ability to write different files as we go. Whole lot of architectural patterns. We've got the defined tech stack, very extensive. Data models are defined and clearly written out using TypeScript. We've got the custom tool utilities, which are integrated into the SDK right here. Then we move into components related to the front end and how it communicates with the back end. Because the shape of data on both the front and the back end can be the same, we've got a shared types to transport that data. And then we get a visualization of the components on both the front end and how they communicate through to the back end. And we can see a little bit of where the shared components meet. Now we've got a sequence diagram that's showing us the way data flows through the system. And this is based on the happy path, meaning what happens when nothing goes wrong. We've then got examples of the tool invocation. This is the writing of JSON. Then the error handling workflow. So this is the unhappy workflow. Now the thing with WebSockets is that they can stop working. So we've got a reconnection workflow coming through and examples of if I had the product catalog working, what it would all look like, the writing of the product JSON as an example. Then it talks about database schema. Well, we don't really have one, but we do have a storage architecture. It's just going to be files and samples of what, in this case, products could look like, blog posts and the configuration for the system and just how the files are going to be laid out. Then it's documenting what we're not going to have. So we don't have schema validation. We don't have index and performance sorted out. We're not using caching. We'll just, the data that we store will just be version controlled in GitHub. Then we've got a full list of what the front end architecture is going to look like, followed by component templates. So when it needs to write a component, it can use the component template to start there. We've got the state management architecture up on the client. So this is examples of how the client can talk to the back end. And this has all been listed through here. We've got the routing organization. Now, remember, we don't have a router. This is just a single page application, but we do have concepts like dealing with static HTML. And then we move on to the backend architecture. We've got the files that are planned to be created. We've got an example template for what a controller could look like. Storing of data, we'll use the repository pattern, but it'll be file-based persistent. And then we've got authentication and authorization flows, which is really just the Claude authentication for the SDK kicking in. Simple little middleware guard, but generally we don't have any authentication going on. And then we've got the full unified project coming through right here. So with all this information done, the next thing to do is just to confirm that our PRD that we've created is actually going to match with the architecture that we've got. Now, in version 6 of BMAD method, they have a section called solutioning, which takes care of that, but we'll do it manually today. Now, I'm just going to go into the PM and we're just going to ensure that we've still got alignment between the PRD and the architecture because the PRD was created before the architecture. So I've just told John, the PM, to check that the architecture document and the PRD are in alignment. Main thing I want to ensure is that the PRD is still in the right order based on the architecture. I also want to see if any of the stories or the epics or anything needs to change based on what we did with the architecture. If you're using version 6 of the BMAD method, this is called solutioning. It's just something I tend to do manually because I found it effective in the past. So it's finished the alignment with the architecture document. It's listed a bunch of areas. I've read through them all and they're very minor. So I think the main thing that we can do is just apply number 1, which is the recommendations to the PRD can be applied right now. So those minor alignment issues are now being fixed between the PRD and the architecture. What we're going to do now is change over to the PO, the product owner, and this is because we want to shard the documents. Now, if I just jump down to this view here, sharding is the idea of splitting up a big document into little documents. And a few of the agents can do sharding, but the one that's designed to do for both architecture and PRDs is the PO, and that's why we've jumped over to there. And we can see the command here. It's called shard doc, followed by the document we want to work with and the destination that we want to put it in. So we'll start by typing in shard doc, and I'll put in the @ sign and type in the PRD. And after that, we'll put it into a file that doesn't currently exist, which is why I haven't used the @ sign. It's docs.prd. Now, while that's doing that, we'll head over to VS Code to see what's going on. So it's this big document that we've got going on here, and we're moving it into this folder, and you can see everything being split up, and there should be a little index that points to where all the different parts of that file exist. So with that done, we go back and we run the shard doc again. This time we're going to click on architecture. And if we head over, we should get an architecture folder being generated, and we got all the indexes pointing to each individual file as well. Now we're about to get into development, but we should have a look at what our docs look like. So we have the brief that was generated. We've split the PRD out into individual files. We've done the same thing for the architecture. But I haven't gotten rid of those files. I've moved them into an archive directory, and I've left the planning document because that's got a lot of detailed files that we can lean on if we need to at the time of generating the stories. So now we're ready to start developing our application. So to get started, we need the Scrum Master. And the Scrum Master will read through the epic and create the first story for us. And that can be done by using this command here called draft. So what we'll do is we'll type in draft, and we could say something like draft first story in this case. So I've got draft first story from first epic. And if we go over and have a look at the epics list, the first one is the Monorepo setup with the basic server and client. So we can see it starting to gather architecture context here. We've got all the different documents that we've created in the architecture folder being read as needed. It's ensuring for the first time that we've made the stories directory. Now I've already done that manually. Now keep in mind that from the epic point of view, it's only got this basic information to start with. So it's drawing from that, followed by all the architecture documents. And we now have our first story in draft modes. And we can see that it's grabbed from the epic, the story card and the acceptance criteria. And from that, it's just developed a bunch of tasks and subtasks to work with. It's aware that there's no story to start off with. This is the first one. It accesses the tech stack. We've got the project structure that it's meant to be creating. We understand the workspace that we're in, and it's gone and prepared some shared types. So it's grabbing a lot of this information from the architecture document, setting up the naming conventions and the coding standards, and it also understands how to set up the TypeScript configuration. It's filled in an area for testing, which at the moment we don't have any testing. And so at this point, we could start doing development. Now, the normal flow in an application would be to read through this and check everything is okay. For now, I'm just going to change this from draft to ready and hit save. And then we can go back to Claude where we can start doing our development. Now it needed to be in that ready mode. So we've done that. So we'll just switch over to the development agent and we can just type develop story. Now I'm going to put in the 1.1 because it'll make it easier for it to find the correct document without having to look through documents. And now it has a plan of action of what it's going to work through. So it's going to set up our package.json, create the workspace directory structure for us, move on to configuring TypeScript, create the workspace package.json, and create the shared types. We'll do the git ignore, and then finally it'll verify that the Monorepo has been set up correctly. So it's finished developing all the code. It makes a statement that everything is in place. It's a little bit hard to test because we don't actually have any source code just yet, but when the story has been updated, We have a lot of checkboxes of the work that's been done. When I personally run the build, I got a couple of errors, but they're actually listed here, so that's okay. All the files have actually been created. So at that point, we can close off this story. Now, you might notice at the end of the story, there's an area for the QA agent. So what we can do is go back over, type in /QA for the quality assurance agent. Now, this is not an agent I would normally use in my own projects. What I have are custom agents more for story acceptance testing. And that's about generating a document for the human to work through and test different things that would be visual in nature. But for this video, we'll use the QA agent and we'll just do a review on 1.1. I mentioned that I'd normally do a story acceptance test plan. Now, that doesn't preclude doing normal tests as well. So usually when you're developing an application, you want to have unit tests. You might want to have end-to-end tests, but definitely you need some sort of a test plan at the end of the story that says these are the things that you have to go and look at. And in a more complex application, I like it to actually walk me through and say, first click on this menu, fill in this piece of information. And all of this information can be derived from a story. And if it was something I was doing with this project, the way it would look is that it would create a new file right next to the story. So we've got 1.1.story, but I would have a 1.1.story- SAT, and in that would be all the guidance and instructions for me to go and visually check that everything's working. Now, currently we can see that the QA agent has come in, it started to update the document. So we now have our overall quality assessment in place. Everything seems to be okay. And one of the interesting statements is this one right here. So it's just talking about future considerations that'll be important with new stories. Now, if we go back to our VS Code, we can see that the story has been updated with all this extra quality assurance checks. So with our first story down, we'll do a commit and we can see that there's all the new configuration and setup for the Monorepo. Plus there's all the architecture, PRD, and the initial story has been added as well. We'll set up a new Claude code, and the first thing we need to do is make sure we're on the Scrum Master, and we'll type in draft story 1.2 and let it go and build that new document for us. Now, like before, it goes through a template, loads in information from the epic that we're on, story 1.2, loads in all the technical architecture documents, also reads from the previous story so it knows what's already been done. So story 1.2 has been drafted. I just had a quick look through the document, so I've set the status to ready. But we've got our acceptance criteria, we've got all of our subtasks in place. So now it's time to develop. We just go back. I've already set up the development agent and we'll just type in develop story 1.2 and let it run. Now, while that's running, I'll just talk about the idea of working with multiple projects at once. One of the things I love about BMAD is that if you are generating two different applications, you've got a fair bit of time while the development is going on. So you saw what I did. I set up the story, then I switched over to the developer agent and I kicked it off. At that point, I'll go to another terminal where I've already got BMAD running on a different project and goes through the same process. Now, personally, I can't do 3 projects at a time because usually the first project has finished and I've got to go back and manually review it. But the good thing is that you can be working on 2 different applications at the same time. So we'll just come back and have a look at what it's doing. And we can see that as it goes, it's signing off on tasks that it's done and it just keeps working through them. So it's finished the development. The definition of done has been filled in. We got some new files. What we'll do is we'll jump over to the quality assurance agent. So again, we're going through a number of code quality metrics and we can see a list of the changes that wherever it says this story, and we can go and have a look at the code over here. Now, if you're a developer, this is an area that you probably spend a lot of time looking. I work more as a software architect. And so while it would be smart for me to check all the code, I usually don't check the code. And that's an interesting thing about this. I've built complete enterprise applications and I spend more time working on the documentation to check the code quality than I do in actually looking at the code. Now, the agents I use for that, I'll talk about in future videos. At the moment, we're just trying to build a simple application. So all the completion notes have been filled in. We know the files that have been changed, and now the QA has come in. So if we go and open up QA and look at the quality gate number 1.2, we can see a YAML file on the changes, though it's a lot easier to see it back in the Claude context window. Now, at this point, we could be moving on to 1.3, but I suspect there might be something in this code that we could test, that we can see if it's working. But the problem is that we don't have a list that we can check. So I've gone and set myself up a new window. This is a conversation I have with a second brain, and the second brain has knowledge about things like BMAD version 4 and version 6. And I've had it just construct for me instructions for creating a story acceptance testing agent. Now, I'll just point out behind the scenes, what's really going on is that if we do a tree, you can see all the different documents that I've got available on Claude. So we've got the SDK here, we've got Claude Code, we've got skills, and you can also see stuff on BMAD method. We've got mostly V4, but we've also got information on V6 as well. And it's through having access to that information plus the project we're working on that we've been able to build these instructions. So what I'm going to do is just take all the information down to the bottom, and we'll just go into our current conversation and say, can you create a new agent for me within the BMAD system? I'm going to paste the information in. So that's coming through, and we'll paste all that information and let it go. Now, if this was version 6 of BMAD, you would have access to a system called BMB, which is the BMAD module builder. And if we go back to our second brain, you can see where I've gotten that information. There is this BMB folder that allows you to create agents for different workflow modules. But because we're in V4, we don't have access to that module. And so I've just let it come through. So what I'm going to do is select the command we've got. I've copied it into the clipboard. And it says that if we run it, we should see some blue timestamp ISO 8601 format. So what we'll do is we'll jump over to a terminal, we'll paste it in and see what happens when we run it. And yep, certainly does. We've got some line console items here. So the good thing is we can see what the application is meant to do based on what the story says it should do. Now, this is a little bit different to a user acceptance test because this will change from story to story. Something that would have been a UAT in, say, 1.1 might now be defunct and not useful in 1.3. So it's not quite the same as a UAT, which is generally for the life of the application. This is only for the life of the story. So now we'll come down to AC4. This is about checking the health of the server. Apparently, if we hit the API health endpoint, we should get a status OK. So I'm just coming up to a terminal and we'll run it. And yes, it's saying status OK. So that's just a quick demonstration on how you can create your own agents at any time. It's easy to just say model it after something, give it a little bit of instructions on what to do. One of the things I find with that particular agent that I did is that some of those commands, like was the terminal blue, is not something I need to visually check. But I could get the AI to do it. So I tend to split it up into two groups. Those that I have to go and check out myself, like entering in a form, did I see an error message? Versus the ones that could just be tested by Claude Code itself. But hang on, you might be saying, what about playwright or end-to-end tests? Could you set them up? And the answer is yes, you can, you probably should. But I find that they're quite hard to get going. They're very fragile, so they're always breaking. And you spend more time wasted around in debugging them, then all you really want in this particular case is, do the forms work the way the story said they were going to be implemented? And I need to test it visually anyway. I can't purely rely on E2E testing. And this is where the SAT agent is really good. So at that point, I've just come back to Claude Code, and what we're going to do is just do a commit and push this up. So what I've done is started a new Claude Code. We've gone over to the Scrum Master. We've started drafting story 1.3. So it's finished creating the story. Let's head over to Visual Studio. I've already set it to ready. I think after it gets through the tasks, the main thing that we're going to want to look at is the fact that there's now a HTML page. So we should be able to see something. Apparently there's going to be a little bit of JavaScript going on. So let's go back and start developing. So I'm just letting it load up the developer. And once that's done, we can just develop story 1.3. So now the development is finished. It looks like we're going to have an index file that we can go and look at. We'll do the SAT soon, but let's just go over to the QA bot for a moment and we'll run our review on 1.3. While that's running, we'll just do a quick check of the document. It says all the tasks done. There should be a public directory. We've got the HTML index. We've got script tags coming through. In a moment, we should see an update to the QA results. So the QA results are in. We've got a new gate file. We can see the story. We will check an SAT soon. There's updates to the packages. The client application now has an index HTML page going on. So let's go and test our story acceptance bot. We should be able to type in SAT and we've got SAT. So currently Taylor is loading into memory. We've got a create SAT command available. We've also got an update SAT command. Now we'll kick off the create, and this command, this one here that we haven't used yet, is just in case I don't like the instructions that the current bot has. We've got the ability to update the bot. So this is reading our SAT, is reading the story that's going to be the source of truth. It's also looking at some of the code that's been created, like the client index HTML. And at the end of this, we should have a new file just sitting next to 1.3 story. So it's just created it. Let's pop it open. So the story itself was about creating a basic HTML page, and the human test that we can do requires us to run the server, which I've just done. And then it wants to go to the chat window, and we should see a blue header called client server communication test. Let's just bring it up. That looks like it. And it's also got a text input box saying enter a message optional. Yep, that's in place. And a blue button labeled test health endpoint. It's also saying gray response area with test response will go here. I wonder if it works. Now we'll come back to having a look at our form. We've got some things around styling. I'm not that concerned about that. What's this? Form submission without a page reload. Should just say server response status is okay. And apparently there's no page reload. So we'll bring up our website and we'll click on test endpoint. And there wasn't a refresh, but we did see the server response update. There's a bonus visual test. We can stop the server, which I've just done. And if we click on test health endpoint, we get failed to fetch. Make sure the server is running. So that's really cool. I wasn't planning to create the SAT agent as part of this video, but this is the idea of it, is that you don't have to think about what the code did. It tells you what has happened and tells you how to reproduce it, which just saves you a heap of time when you're using the BMAD method to develop an application. We'll come back to our terminal where I was running that server, and we'll just clean up after ourselves. So we'll do a bit of a commit right now, and we've got a great commit message. Everything's listed. So for story 1.4, I've just run everything at once. I haven't done any testing yet. We started off with Bob, the Scrum Master. He created the story. I went a little bit premature into Taylor for the story acceptance test, because that can be derived from the story, but it should also be done after the development. So I needed to do a bit of an update later. I also ran James to develop all the code, and then did Quinn to do the quality assurance. So the new documentation files are that we have a story, we have an SAT, and we have a Q&A document. And from a code point of view, we've got new files plus a little bit of an update to the README. So we can see the endpoints that we want to test. But if we go and look at the SAT plan, we've got a little bit of console logging that we should see in chat. And we should see some server responses if we type anything into the chat window. Apparently, it can also handle a disconnection. So let's go test them out. So here's our web application. We'll hit refresh and it's saying that we're currently connected. Let's just say Appy Dave here, press enter, and we're getting a response received. I've just asked it to kill the server over in Claude Code, because I think it's running in the background over here. I didn't actually start it. And look at that. It's starting to say that it's disconnected. What I'll do is restart it from the terminal myself. And if we come back to our web application, hopefully it just automatically reconnects. So at this point, we're right at the very end of the epic. So number 1 is done. We've done stories 1, 2, 3, and 4 from the epic. Now, at this point, we might want to do a retrospective. This is something that you would do in agile development. I recently talked about that in a video. So this video here, how to make your AI coding partner smarter, was an AI retrospective that I did a few months ago on BMAD. This has now been implemented into BMAD, so you'll see that in the version 6 once that's available. Otherwise, you can watch this video to see how it works. But for now, we will just move straight on to epic number 2. So at this point, we have finished our first feature, our first epic in the system. We have this client and server application. It uses Socet Io and has bidirectional communication, meaning that we can type something in the text box and it immediately hits the server. Or if the server was to want to communicate with the client, it could do that as well. Now, all the code and prompt sequences are available up on the GitHub repo. If you want to access that, there's a link to my community down below. Now, next up, we're going to work on Epic 2, which is the Claude Agent SDK. And what that's going to allow us to do is put the equivalent of Claude code into our server. So all the sorts of stuff you've seen me doing with BMAD, which is creating code, writing documents, doing research, hopefully we can do that from our own application so that we can build HTML pages and we can generate product and blog post content. So we'll head back to Claude Code and we've got our Scrum Master set up and we're going to draft story 2.1. And so we have our story created. It's as a developer, I want a Claude Agent SDK installed and authenticated so that I can integrate the agent-driven conversational capabilities into the application. Now we'll do one extra step this time and we're going to go over to the product owner agent. And with this, we're going to run this validate story draft 2.1. And what that'll do is run a validation on the story that we've already done. And what it's really attempting to do here, and this is an optional task, is just ensure that there were no hallucinations or mistakes made in generating the story. Now, I don't normally do the validation system because it slows down my general workflow, but sometimes what you notice is that code goes off the rails. And if you'd have done the validation, you would have saved yourself a lot of headaches. So let's have a look at what the validation system is trying to do. So firstly, it's an anti-hallucination protection is going on. What it does is a QA against just inventing stuff. Then what it does is make sure that all the documentation it needs is internally stored within that story. And then finally, a whole lot of checks and balances on the template and the sequence of the story. So use the product owner agents validate story with discretion, like when you think something's complex, because this will save a lot of future headache if things go off the rails during the development cycle. Now, so far, we've gone through a full epic without any issues. So I didn't really need to do it, but I thought I'd just throw it in so you can see what it does. So after that, we go into developing the 2.1 task and everything was going really well, created all the code that we needed, ran the definition of done checklist, and this is when a bunch of warnings popped up. So you can see here that there's an external dependency that we need, which is to authenticate into Claude. So we'll just open up a new terminal window and we'll paste that in and see what happens. So I ran into a couple of problems doing authentication, and apparently I was on the wrong version of Claude. So what I've done is an update, and I'm going to take you through the workflow as it stands. I've just logged into 2.0.42. And I'm just going to do a logout. So this ensures that we are now out of Claude. And down below, I've created a little test SDK script, and we're seeing an SDK test fail because we're not logged in. So what we'll do is we'll come back up here and we'll run the login function, and we'll say yes and yes. We're using our browser subscription, so we can just come up and click on the authorize button. We'll come back to the terminal. It says we're signed in. So let's clear this and try it again. And it's just going to say hello in exactly 5 words, and hopefully it gets something back. And so now we can see that our SDK is actually working. So at the moment, the 2.1 story is finished. If we go and look at the main story acceptance test that we need to look for, it's just that we've got colored timestamp with the agent SDK running successfully. If we go down to our terminal, we can see that entry just here. So from a terminal point of view, the server seems to be working. All of our acceptance tests have worked. And the little test tool that was created is also returning valid data that the authentication is working. Now for story 2.2, the basic agent event loop, I've run this ahead of time. And so we'll go straight into testing it. So here we can put in a message. I'm going to say, can you help me with the Claude SDK? We'll press send to agent, and you'll see a message coming through here. And currently it's saying processing, and we've got this great formatted HTML response. I'd be happy to help you with the SDK. However, I need to clarify that I'm a HTML application building bot. And the messaging that's here happens to be because of a system prompt that was created in the last story. So let's go and check out the flow that we did in conversation. And you can see that we started off with the Scrum Master. And we just asked Bob to draft story 2.2. And with the story created, we can see that it's about doing the minimal event loop for communicating with the SDK. And we can already see from the success criteria that we were able to send a message, see it logged, and then see it displayed in HTML. Now the main file created will be the agent event loop, and we've got this solid readiness score, and we've also got a list of things that the developer could do, but we'll notice at the bottom that it does suggest that we could use a validation. We don't really have to with this sort of story, but I've run one. So we look at Sarah, the technical product owner. We can then validate the next story. Now it's just comparing the story to other documents in the system, previous documents, goals, making sure that everything's in alignment. Everything's great. There's one little yellow flag here, so we'll go have a look at it. There's a slight little question here, but we won't worry about it in the story or rectifying it because the development agent will figure this out pretty easily. And so next we just install the dev agent, which is James, and then we can just run the develop story command. As James gets all the work done, it's all being marked off on the task list. The story document is being filled in along the way, and we're seeing a little bit of a state change in the document, just making sure that it's now ready for review. We see confirmation of what was either created or modified. And so with the code complete, I just now need a plan of action written up for me. So the story acceptance test is what will kick off. This is that new agent we created. We've loaded it up, Taylor is in place, and we just run the create story acceptance test for 2.2. So a new document is created, and that helps us understanding things like what are the new files or the modifications going on if we want to go and have a look at the code, a write-up of what the code is, plus a little bit of key implementation details just to help, just so that you can understand it a little bit easier. So we'll go and have a look at that document. We've got the acceptance test guide with the prerequisites, how to set it up, and then we go straight into the human tests. And we started all of this off by running this particular test where we saw the information coming through, we saw the log messages coming through. Now you got to see the happy path. If we put in, hello, can you help me? We'd get some sort of clean response coming back from the agent SDK. So what I did for the acceptance test 8 happy path is I pasted in the console log with a little bit of a message saying that I don't see anything suggesting that this actually got all the way through. It said that I probably need to do a hard reset on the HTML. So I did that and I started getting a response. This was very good, except what I was seeing was object all the way through the response. So I just asked it, was it expecting that that was all we were going to get? Because I didn't go in thorough enough reading the story to know whether I was going to get clean data. It said, no, it's not right. So I went and made some modifications to the code. It first started by suggesting what those modifications were, and then it made the changes automatically. And that brings us to where we are at the moment, where we can now put in a message. We'll say, what do you think would be a good application to build with the Claude SDK? And we've got a conversation stream that makes a whole lot of sense. And remember that this agent is paired with a system prompt, which is about building web applications. So we clean up the end of the story by just using the QA agent, which is Quinn, and we ran the review story to build this quality gate document. So we have this audit trail of things that have happened, including that the initial implementation did have a failure in it. Now, I've just implemented 2.3, which is real-time streaming. And one of the interesting things is I was also able to create a BMAD workflow to do all the work for me in one sequential flow. We'll look at that in a moment. But for now, let's just test it out. So I've created a bunch of testing prompts that we can work with. The idea is that I want to see chunks come through the system. So we'll go and select this particular one and come back to our web form. Now I've made a minor change to the system prompt so that it has a command called test. What I want it to do is ignore the idea that it's a web application building agent. And we'll just paste this information in, and it's starting to write some information. And you can see here it's saying processing at the moment. And all of this has been done in one chunk. So the interesting thing about the Claude Agent SDK is that you can't stream word by word. It is done in chunks. So it's a little bit slow between updates, but you can see that the streaming is working between where my initial message came through and then the agent got involved. We'll try a different version where we're testing of reading the package.json. We've got, I'll help you read the package.json. So we see chunk 0 coming through right here. And now it'll do an analysis MD, and we can see the 3 chunks coming through over in the console log. So the last test is what would happen if we bombarded it with ideas. So I'm going to put in number 10. And we'll press enter, then we'll paste and we'll put 20, and we'll paste and we'll put 100, and then we'll paste and we'll do 10 again. And we can see that counting to 10, this is what it's come up with. Count to 20, it's done that for us, count to 20. And notice things are starting to get a little bit out of order. So it's basically as the information comes in is when it's written to the stream. And what I notice about this is that it works very much similar to how Claude Code would work, which is different to ChatGPT, where you actually have to wait for each response to come through. Now, I don't personally know whether the way with Claude Code, if I was to rapid fire prompts like this, they kind of get aggregated. You can put in an idea and then follow it up with a change of idea and it takes it into account. Don't think that's happening here. But we've got the rudimentary ideas of what you can already do with Claude Code all working. Now let's get back to the workflow, because I created a custom workflow to build all this out so that it could just run without too much input from me. And it's called the Appy Dave workflow. What it does is it starts off by asking a question, what story do you want to have? So we did 2.3. At that point, it started creating the story. And it did that by starting up the Scrum Master and running the draft story command. And as per normal, we got a detailed story written. It's in draft format at the moment. And it's, as a developer, I want to stream responses so that the end users can see information progressively. Now we've seen that working, so we know it's all going on. It wrote the initial plan of what the code should look like in the story. And then it gave me this status update. So we can see that it's in draft. Acceptance criteria is there, and it's got a couple of questions. Do I want to continue? Do I want to skip or exit? So we got a final summary of the creation of the story. We can see that it's in draft mode at the moment, and it's asked me, do I want to continue on to validation or skip? Now I said that the validation is optional, but I decided to just press continue, and we can see that it's now going to the product owner and validating the information in the story against other documents. Now we're on to story 2.4, which is all about reading the JSON document. And you can see that I've done a basic test here. We can see the conversation finding information on the computer. It's got 3 sample products in place. And if we jump down to the conversation, it started as usual with the new AppyDave workflow. We've got 2.4 being the story that we want to run. It created that story, and then I just typed in continue. This moved on to validating the file that gave a 9.5 out of 10. And the little issues that were there were all dealt with pretty cleanly during the development phase. So we didn't need to do anything. Once I then set the status to develop, we were able to come in and click on the develop story. It also set up some sample data automatically. So we had some test products in place. We also have broken data, which we haven't done a test case on just yet. Next, it built the story acceptance test based off the story and the code that we've developed. It also ran for me all the automated tests that it could do, anything that was to do with the terminal or something that could be run from a command. Now, during the SAT generation, it also generated a couple of files that were very unexpected. There was this human test. There was also a quick test. So what I had to do was let it know that the SAT agent that we had created earlier in this project probably has some flaws, and if it could go through and rectify them at the same time as cleaning up these files and putting them in the correct location. And this is the sort of bespoke issue that you can get from time to time. As soon as you see something out of the ordinary with the BMAD method, it's important that you probably fix it in the moment and let the system know either through learning documents or your Claude MD, or in this case, an agent's file, that it's not quite right. Can it go and update itself? So we can see right here that the create SAT task has been updated with new instructions, and the cleanup of unnecessary files has happened right here. Now, when I went to read the JSON using the AI agent, there were a couple of problems that needed to use the development agent to fix. The first one was a little permission issue. It rectified that really quickly based off documentation. Then there was the ROM folder. It got that fixed up as soon as I gave it an example of where I was trying to read and where the files actually were. And then lastly, which was the hardest one, was that we were implementing this concept of read JSON, but it didn't have any ability to figure out what JSON documents were available or to discover the one you actually wanted. So it suggested and then quickly built 2 extra tools. The list would show any files that were available, and the preview would let the agent interrogate the files to figure out which one you actually wanted. So let's go and test the read system. We've got a little products document, and we've also got a broken document. And we'll just head over to our site and we'll say, can you get me a list of products? We'll send that to the agent. It's processing at the moment. I'll help you get a list of products. First, let's discover them. I've found some products. Let me read them. And it's got the file, and look at that. It's got the AppyDave on Skool. So it's got that file that we just updated. And we'll see if this test against the broken JSON document will work. We'll say, can you get a list of items from broken? And it's doing some processing at the moment. It's found that we have a broken.json document. Let's read it. And this is perfect. It's giving a nice message that the data is malformed and the system is not falling over. Just finished story 2.5, which is the ability to write information to the different data files. I've done a few use cases, but let's go through the individual changes that have happened. So from the AppyDave workflow point of view, there's a little bit of an improvement because on load, it has a look through to see what the last story was that was done and suggests the next story to go and write. So I've just put in 2.5 here. So it's created the story really quickly, but the challenge I had with the last story was that we added a couple of new tools. That was the lists and the preview JSON. And so what I did at the time of validation, which is the next thing, I then gave it some extra context by talking about the list and preview from the previous story and also giving it a little bit of a use case. So I was able to talk through the capabilities it could already see with adding JSON, but then it went on to document a bunch of critical gaps, which is exactly what we want. We want it to pick up old ideas, bring them into the new story and make it available for the development. So it gave me a bunch of options. I went with number one, that's just fix or update the story. So we're seeing new information being added to the story, and that allowed us to go into developing with the new capabilities thought of along the way. And then when it wrote the SAT plan, one of the things it did automatically this time, this because I'm gradually improving agents and workflows as we go, is that it did the automated tests of the terminal commands. But I did ask it to run it one more time and just give me a summary of what's going on. So we can see the 8 tests that are from the terminal are all working. And then it started listing 8 different tests that I as the human could go and test and the steps to work on them. Now, the first one actually failed, and the failure was simply that it wrote the JSON document out in quote marks, so as a string. So I let it know that there was an issue there, quickly found and rectified that particular problem. Then I ran into a new problem, which didn't end up being a bug, but just a gap in the requirements. And you can see the basic idea here is that I had a conversation that said add sugar for 50 cents. Now, I said that statement after a prior statement of looking in the products table, so I assumed contextually it would just work. And the issue is that it had no conversational memory each time it went back to the SDK. So it suggested we could either fix it or create a new story. So what I've done is added a new story to this epic called 2.7, just based directly off the information right here. So the ability to have conversational memory is something we'll do in 2 stories time. So let's test the idea of adding and updating files in the data folder. We've got to test products. We can see the information that's here. We've got one broken file as well. And we'll come over and say, can you add a product? We want sugar and we want it to be 50 cents. After that, we'll go down to our use cases, and we've got this create an electronics JSON document under the catalog folder. So it'll be a nested file, and it's saying it will do it with a laptop and a phone. Now we'll head down to our JSON document. We can see that this is expanded to have sugar at 50 cents. Looks like we've got our new file. Let's just drag that in. We've got an electronics catalog, and we've got multiple items coming in here, and they're quite detailed. Now let's try out a couple of discovery commands. So we'll go what JSON exists in the data directory. Let's see what comes through. We can see the broken and the test products. We don't have the catalog, so it hasn't looked deeply, but what we'll do is we'll add a category field to the test products table. So click that, send to agent. It's telling us it'll add a category. Now it's done it. And if we head over to VS Code, we can now see that on products, we've got these categories. So we've got groceries over here. And there was a couple of other interesting use cases that all worked, which I didn't even think of. It just created these, and the ability to create a file outside of the data directory was blocked, creating a file with circular references. And the last useful example is to just add 5 items, an array to a new table. So here we have 5 sites added. So what we're seeing now is this really powerful mechanism where we can read, we can write, we can update, we can work with subdirectories of files back on our server. Now these are data files. Next, we'll be looking at how we can do HTML files. But the whole idea of this is more for an internal tool. It's not the sort of tool that we would use up on a public website where it can write to your server. But if you're trying to build a little application for yourself and you want the ability to dynamically update data just by talking into the microphone, then this is a perfect technique that we can be using. Now with Story 2.6, our conversational bot is now starting to get really powerful. So what we'll do is we'll start off with a simple question, and that's what HTML files exist in the public directory. And you can see here it's saying that there are currently no HTML files in the public directory. And if we head down to VS Code, we can confirm that. So we've got our data directory from the last session available. But in the server, when we click on public, there's nothing there right now. So the full conversation for this workflow was that we started with the AppyDave workflow. It figured out that it had done 2.5 and that it could move on to 2.6. And so it was able to start up the Scrum Master and create the story for us. Now, because we'd made a lot of extensions within the 2.4 and the 2.5 story, I decided to let it know that it was modeling these two stories, except rather than for data, it was going to be for HTML. And so while there were major differences like the type of file and the location that they were going to be, the actual tooling was pretty much the same. And so I suggested that it have a look at the 2.4 and the 2.5 before updating this story with new capability. From that, it was able to notice all the critical gaps that were in place and come up with 4 separate tools to implement. Before that, it only had one tool, which was writing the HTML. Now, to show that this was an extensive change, we can see as we scroll through that there's a lot of green and reds, a lot of stuff being taken out, a lot of new stuff being added. And the public directory is the 2.6 story. So then we changed over to the development agent. Everything pretty much went off without a hitch. There were 2 different problems that I did need to address, and you can see them here. The first one was that it wasn't actually serving from the public directory. I was able to test all the HTML, but not from the application. So that was a bit of a problem. The other problem was that when I was trying to display data that we created in the previous story, it also wasn't showing through. So I did a little bit of prompt engineering just to get the code working. It was really easy to do because Claude Code gave me option A, B, and C. And I just said, let's go with A and C. And it just wrote all the code that we needed. So with our chat agent set up to story 2.6, we'll just put in a simple prompt that says, can you create a HTML page for AppyDave? And along with that question, I'll just paste in a little bit of information I just copied from my website, and we'll press enter and see what it does with that. Now, you'll notice as it's building it that we've got this concept down the bottom of pages. So I've also added a little menu to the bottom of the chat box to show any public pages that are being created. So it's just come back with, I'll create a page. Let me check. I'll create it. And it looks like a bunch of stuff's being created. And we can see this little index. Let's click on that and see what we get. We got AppyDave. And this is actually a whole lot of information from my main website. We'll just pop over and have a look at that. And we can see master AI and prompt engineering, different projects, and down the bottom, different channels. So if we come through and look at it here, it looks like it's all the same information. All it's done is created this little HTML file for us, and it's put all the colors in there. Let's see if we can do something a little bit more complex, and we'll do a prompt that says, can you create a HTML page called cat-dog and do it talking about a pet store that is about cats and dogs? And let's go with the colors of brown, yellow, and green. So we'll just let this prompt come through as soon as it's typed in. So we'll send that through to the agent, and we can see all our product data down here. We can see our cat, dog, and our HTML file. So what I think I want to do now is create a new HTML file. We'll go with a CSS file as well. So the prompt will go, can you create a HTML file called aitldr.h? And can we create a CSS file to go with that? Can the colors of that CSS be light blue, dark blue, and white? And can we make sure that we're displaying a whole lot of products? Can the products come from our test products and document? So I'll just let that prompt come through. There it is. And we'll press enter. So there's a couple of typos in there, but it looks like we're going to create a HTML file matching CSS file. Perfect. Now let me check what pages exist. And while that's happening, what aitldr is one of my other channels. This is a faceless YouTube channel where most of the focus is on YouTube storytelling. So we've got something coming through. They're not necessarily the colors we normally use, but let's go and click on this and see what we get. aitldr product catalog. And this is really interesting from a few points of view. So the actual widgets that are in the product listing, AppyDave on Skool, Sugar, this has all come through. But we've even got the HTML links so we can get to the homepage. Can we get to the cat and dog? We can get to the cat and dog. What about products? that's taking us to where we are. And if we go back to the chat interface, so at this point, we've almost achieved everything I wanted with this project. It was the ability to create any sort of data we want. Let's go and test the idea of updating data. Can you go and add 3 different products about nail polish? Let that come through and send that to the agent. And what I'm hoping it'll do is it'll come up with 3 interesting products. It should be able to add it to the only file we've got, which is the test products. I probably should go and rename that. Let's just go back to this. It can see the file. It's now apparently added things. Oh, look at that. It's showing them as well. So we'll go and click on the AI TLDR page and see what that's showing. Okay, we've got 5 products. Now our page hasn't updated, but if I go down to Visual Studio, we can see that 3 actual products have been added. So my assumption is it's not reading from the JavaScript, and it's actually been hard-coded. So maybe we can modify that. So we're going to work with the idea of, can we update the HTML of AI TLDR so that the products are actually just reading from that URL? So we'll send that through. While that's doing its thing, we can have a look at the URL. This is the data that's available to us. It says that the page is working. Let's go and click on it. And look at that. We've got 8 products. We've got 3 new products added. So yeah, we're using our chat interface to both create data, update data, delete it. Well, we don't know whether it can delete, and to actually modify the HTML. So let's see if we can do one more compound idea. So we'll go with the idea of, can it delete widgets from the test products table, the JSON document? Can we also go to the AI TLDR CSS and we'll start changing the colors to be a light pink, blue, and yellow. We'll send that through to the agent. We should see it coming down the bottom here. So currently it's doing a search broadly for the CSS files. It's found them. It's now going to read the full content from them. It's found widget A, B, and C, which it's going to remove from the JSON. Then it's going to go and update the CSS. And it looks like it's done that. And what we'll do is click on AI TLDR and look at that. We got pinks, blues, and yellows, and we've removed the 3 widgets. Moving on to story 2.7, which is a new story that came about because we encountered a bug where if you typed in a couple of messages, it didn't understand the previous messages. So we've put it in place. And what I thought we'd do is test it by maybe changing the title of this particular website, and at the same time also change the price of just cats. And we'll do that in 2 separate messages. So here's our first prompt. Can you change the title of the cat dog website so that rather than saying cat and dog pet store, it just says pet store? So we'll kick that off and then we'll start the next prompt. Can you go to the cat dog website and change every product that is related to a cat so that it is $100 more? And we'll just press enter on that one. Now, if we look at the current website, it says cat and dog pet store. Now I've done a refresh on it and we can see that the pet store has been updated. We'll want to see if the $24.99 becomes $124.99, and they have changed. So there's the new value, and we've got the old value as $24.99 in cat and dog pet store. So from a conversational point of view, it was pretty much the standard workflow. We started off with the AppyDave workflow. We created the 2.7 story. We validated it. The minor change here was that I asked it to go and read the documentation around the SDK, and we have a second brain of information around that particular tool. The basic findings from that were all listed and updated the story. We then just did our standard development phase. We did an SAT. There was nothing in there other than to run the 2 commands that I did. And so we just finish off with a review from the QA agent. So that brings us to the end of Epic 2. And what we can now do is we can add products or any sort of data that we like. We can update it. We can also play around with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and we could call this a complete application. But if we look at what Epic number 3 is going to be about, we'll be able to give the chat interface a much needed upgrade. And we'll do that by going to React, where we'll use Vite, Shadcn, Tailwindcss, and we'll use the Vercel AI elements to give a really clean chat interface. Now, it's a fairly simple epic. We're going to initialize the React application. Then we're going to install the Shadcn and configure Tailwindcss. Then we'll build the chat interface again using Vercel AI elements. And lastly, we'll implement a simple dark mode, light mode toggle. So one of the things that we have to do before we actually start the first story for epic number 3 is we just need to do a little bit of a retrospective. So I've got a basic question, just asking it to think about what it would need to do a retrospective. And it's come up with a long list of tasks that it should perform to build up that particular document. I've specifically told it to think deeply, and I've also given it as much time as it needs to do a detailed job. And so it goes through and it writes this long document, and we don't have to read the document, but it will have information from here that it can pull on when generating the stories for Epic 3. So story 3.1 is finished. There's not actually a lot to see. There's a little bit of console logging. We can see now that it's using React and Vite. And from a front-end point of view, all we've got is Hello World, BMAD, Claude SDK, and the fact that it says Vite connected. And we'll just check that the hot module reloading is working. That's working okay. So we have a foundation now for the React version of the chat client. Let's move on to story 3.2. Now we are on story 3.2 and there's not a lot to be seen just yet. We've got an installation of Shadcn and UI. And if we pop it up, what we'll see is this user interface with the basic typing area in place. We've got a click me and we've got some buttons, and the styling is very ordinary at the moment. And according to the component verification, that's exactly what we want to see at the moment. We've just completed story 3.3 and we're really close to the end of building the application. And what you can see now is that it started to come together quite nicely. We'll demonstrate where it's at in a moment. But I'll point out that this is the 14th story that we've done, and every story we've done up until this one just came across without a hitch. It was able to be created, it was validated, it was written by the software developer. We were able to do the story acceptance testing, and we were able to do the QA afterwards, and everything was really quite quick. This is the one story where everything changed. So I'll do a little bit of a post-mortem analysis of it as well after I've demonstrated where we're at. So let's test out our new chatbot, and what we'll do is we'll search for products first. So can you tell me what products are available? And we'll let this prompt come through. We'll press enter. And so we can see this little bubble coming up here. That's what the user has said. This is what the agent SDK is responding with at the moment. And there are our products. We've got some groceries. We've got some beauty products, nail art sort of stuff. So let's create a little website. Can you create a little HTML website called Beauty and Joy? Can this be a nail art sort of store? Can we get both a HTML page and a CSS file? And we'll let that kick off. And in a moment, it'll come up with a plan of action. And here it's starting to happen. And what we can also do is just head over to VS Code, where we can see what we currently have. We have a couple of websites here, CatDog Index and AI TLDR. And if we come back and we look at these little pages here, this is where we can see this. And look at that, it just created Beauty and Joy. So maybe that's already started. Let's go back and see whether it's created here. Yes, we can see it. We've got a CSS file and a HTML file, and that's why that came about. So let's go and click on that and see what we get. Okay, we've got a interesting looking nail art shop. I think we can do better styling than that. So what I'll do is I'll bring it back here and say, can you update the CSS styling for the Beauty and Joy website? And can you use this basic guidelines? So what we'll do is we'll just go down and paste some extra work, and hopefully this will show up cleanly. Here we go. We've got soft, modern, feminine. We got some primary colors coming through, and it should be updating the CSS very soon. And it looks like it's finished, it's actually created a different HTML. So if we go up, we now have two. We have beauty and joy, and we have beauty. Let's look at the old one. Here's the old one, and the new one is looking a fair bit more elegant. Now, ideally, I would have liked that to actually update the original website, but for a first pass, add a chatbot that can create data, read data, and also use it for websites. This is working really well. Now, I said that this story wasn't actually as successful in the coding as any other story that we've done, but let's have a look at what it was originally. It's build a chat interface with Vercel AI. As a developer, a chat interface using the AI element patterns so that users can send messages and have streaming agent responses. Now that's working, and so pretty happy with that. But let's have a look at the post-mortem. And this is where a number of issues happen. Now, part of the issues happen because I think when I was doing it, I was really tired, so I wasn't paying attention to different things going on. But the main issue, which I seem to run into every time I do Tailwind, and totally forgot about it in this particular case, is that it got configured with V3 syntax, but it was a version for Tailwind. And you might have noticed in the last story that there was styling that looked pretty average. And I said, well, that's actually how it's meant to be. Well, that's not the case. And the reason is that the Tailwind styling was misconfigured, and it took a little while to find it out. Another issue that was happening under the hood for me is that one of the servers, there are two in this, was meant to be running on 5173, but Claude was actually running a separate one on 5174. And so I was trying to see updates and nothing was coming through. And I kept saying to Claude, this is not working. And he kept saying, I've fixed it, but I wasn't seeing anything visually. Now, again, a lot of that was me tired at the time, but this is one of the realities of having AI agents that can run the servers for you, is that if they've got a conflict with your current server, then it's just going to spawn a new one on a different port. Then it had a bunch of issues with the bubbles and the drop-down menu that we saw showing up underneath the bubbles. Now, the reason I actually wrote this document wasn't just so that I could show you the sort of challenges that you can run into, but because once you write a document like this, you can make it a part of your documentation system. So if any other issues happen in the future and you notice it, you can say, can you go and read other documentation or lessons learnt that we've done in the past? And this can be a perfect way of training the AI model to write code the right way if you see a certain problem showing up again and again. Now we're nearly at the end and about to demonstrate this system all working. So the 3.4 planning document ended up getting a fair few changes. This became a little bit of a conversation to deal with different issues. So the first thing we did was we added in the light mode, dark mode, and that's working. We've got an activity slide out panel that's actually working really well. Clicks happen everywhere. It's all using Socet Io. It had nice status checks on when files are added, deleted, updated. When I went to use the system, there were a number of issues just with the system prompt. So I kept feeding the conversations back in and asking it to update the system prompt. It now works really well. And so now I've set it up for 4 different demonstrations. Now there's only 2 in the video. The first one is the little example at the beginning of the video, is essentially based off these prompts here. And the full session that we're about to demonstrate is the creation of the bookstore, and we can see all the prompts that we're about to run. Now we have our chat application created using the BMAD method. It's got the Claude SDK as a backend. Some of the capabilities is that at the moment we're seeing no pages, but as we add pages, they'll appear automatically. There's also an activity log showing every file coming through. So if we just start off with our first creation, we're going to create 5 bookstore products. We've set the prices. One of them is out of stock. Now it's created a file and automatically created products.json. We can see 5 products created here. Next, we'll create a products HTML file. Now, as that comes through, it should automatically update this to show 1 product, at which point we'll be able to click on it and see a menu. So we'll go and add a few more products. And if we pop up the website, hopefully we're going to see it dynamically load because of the socket connection, which Means that any updates on the server will automatically come through to the client. We're seeing that right there. If we don't like the style, we can ask for it to create a product CSS file. This is going to go with a professional blue and gold color scheme. Now, this probably won't update the HTML because we're only asking for it to create the CSS at the moment, and nothing has updated. So we'll just say, update the product's HTML so it uses the CSS. While we're doing that, we'll have a look at what it's created. So we've got a bunch of CSS created right here, and it's just started writing the file, and a refresh is showing the blue and gold coming through on the website. Now there's a little home page. If we click on that, we're going to get a file not found. So what we'll do is we'll come back to our chat client and put in create a HTML file. This is the index. We also want to feature a few products on the front page. So let's bring up our page and we'll click on the home, see what we get. And we've got a shop now and a chat with us. And it looks like we've got some featured products on the beginning. Let's go back to shop now and we're taken back to the products. At this point, it might be useful to create some blog posts. So we'll start with a little bit of data and we can see that it's creating it with a title, author, date, content, and tags. So it's very much related to the bookstore. If we click on the blog post, we can see the information coming through here and here. So we'll create a HTML page. We're making sure we're using the sockets. If we bring up the page, started writing the page. Now I think it's created the blog page, but when we look, there's no link on the products. There's no link on the home page. So what we'll do is we'll just jump down and put in can you add a link on the home and the products page? If we click through, we can read our blog articles here. This looks good. We'll click on home. We'll come back to the products. And we've got the blog here as well. So the three articles we've got Golden Age of Reading, Building Your Personal Library, and we've got Philosophy in Pages. Let's go and add another blog post to the blog post JSON. It's in the middle of writing, and we have creating your home library. So at that point, it might be good to think about it's coming up to Christmas. Can we have a design that makes sense? So we'll apply a Christmas styling to the products CSS with snowfall animation and festive red-green colors. It's started to come through. There's styling bugs and we can't currently click on the blog post. If we go over to the blog, we can see the tinsel coming through here. One thing you might notice though is that there were a number of attempts to get this working. So we started with apply Christmas styling to the product CSS and had to follow it up with 5 different prompts to get it working across all the different pages. It had a recommendation to go with scalable vector graphics. So that was the recommendation we went through. Now, since it's Christmas, I think we should take the sold out item and do an article about promoting some of it. So we'll write a blog post announcing that there's a special that the product has gone from $32 to $22, but there's only 10 left. Now the article has been written, but we better go and update the products so that it's in stock and we have a price for it. We'll click on products, and this is the product that we're looking to see change. And there it is, it's changed through. It might be useful to change the color as well. Just asking for it to be highlighted at the moment. And there's our holiday special, slightly misaligned, but we'll leave that for now. And let's make sure the homepage has a product for the holiday special exclusive, and we should be able to view it in the catalog. So that brings us to the end. And what we've been able to do is build this complete application just with natural language prompts. And we did that using context engineering. That's with the BMAD method. And the backend system that we've built is using the Claude Agent SDK. So this is giving us all the power of Claude code within our own web applications. So the demonstrations we did was that we were able to create HTML pages, JSON documents, CSS files, make sure all the links go from page to page. Now, all the code is available. You can check it out in the repository. And if you want to join the community, we have more of a discussion and teachings each day on prompt engineering. Now, if you're loving the power of BMAD, in the next video, we're going to use BMAD again. But this time we're going to recreate an orchestration framework just like BMAD. We're going to call it POEM, which is the Prompt Orchestration and Engineering Method. And the whole idea of it is so that we can create and test prompts in a technique very similar to BMAD. I'm Happy Dave. I'll see you in the next video.